So, hello everyone. I am Allison Posey, as was mentioned at the beginning. I um, I also have a brief introduction here for you all. I'm seeing some of the love coming through. Nice to see you all. I work currently at Learning Solutions, where I'm an instructional designer, and I worked at CAST for years and years, directing institutes and thinking about universal design for learning. And I am also getting ready for my classroom. I am starting university teaching. I teach at LaSalle University. We begin next week, so I have a little bit of those butterflies in my stomach as well. I used to teach high school science, so for those of you who are science teachers, that is near and dear to my heart. And as I mentioned, I have a degree in mind, brain, and education, where I really do try to make those connections between what we know about the learning brain and our design. I am a mom of two kids who are no longer kids. They are 21 and 24 years old now. I love being in nature and hiking. And I just thought for fun, I would show you one of my good classic 1970s haircuts that I had when I was a child. And if any of you had a favorite haircut like that and you wanted to share something about that in the chat, I do welcome you to to share about a good old favorite haircut that you may have had at some point. I am seeing some science teachers in the audience, and I am just seeing such an amazing range of where you all are from. So I'm just so honored to get to be with you all this morning or afternoon or evening. I want to kick off by inviting you to do a little imagining, if you will, imagining the possibilities. And I invite you on this journey to imagine and create possibilities that every learner, every individual enters a space where they have that feeling of being welcome, invited, that they can participate. What is in that space really helps to communicate that feeling of belonging and high expectations for learning. And when we use magic to try to imagine a space, sometimes we're actually able to make that happen. So when I say bring some magic with you today, maybe that magic will turn into a reality. Um, I'm seeing that there's a question on my slide. I'm going to just pause and make sure everyone's okay for me to continue. It's just a black screen. Okay. Can I just double check with the tech team that you're able to see my screen all right? It's just a black screen. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. Let's just try this one more time. How is that? Okay, some can see it. Okay, okay, some can see and hear. All right. So if you cannot hear, hopefully my words will be an alternate representation of the slides that are there. Okay, here. So we're imagining some possibilities, right? Imagining spaces where everyone feels like they belong, that there's this high expectation for learning. And I will say that the neuroscience is crystal clear that cognition is profoundly subsumed within the process of emotion. So we're not reducing the rigor by thinking about the emotions and how our learners feel when they interact in these spaces. So I do want to assure you, the neuroscience is saying this is good for learning. And I also want to kick off by noting how powerful design can be. It's not necessarily a magical solution for learning, but it can support and align with some of our core values about learning, and it can make a real difference for our students. And once we start to think about the power of design in spaces, we will start to observe it everywhere in both big and small spaces. So, for example, there is a door at my local coffee shop, and it has a handle to pull on the door, but you actually need to push the door in order to enter. And almost every time I go to this coffee shop, I pull on the door and I feel a little silly. It's this small moment and I feel ridiculous whenever I make the mistake. And I think, you know what? This is a little piece of design that could make a difference for even entering the space. So today we'll be exploring some big and small moments of designing for learning, some options. Some of these ideas you may love, some of these ideas you may already do, some of these ideas may not be for you, and that's okay. But I do invite you to bring your ideas, share ideas. I'll keep checking in with the chat. And I do invite you to take a moment and think about what are some of your core beliefs about learning? So then we can brainstorm how our design is aligning to those core beliefs. So for example, perhaps you value learner variability, that every student is unique. We can start thinking about, well, how is our design aligning with that core value? Maybe you have a belief that everyone should feel welcome in the space. So then, of course, we answer the question, how are we designing for that value, for that belief? And it becomes really fun then. It becomes really empowering for us as educators, wherever you're designing from, to be able to start to design those spaces. So I see a value in creativity, a value in participation. I love these. Valuing positive atmospheres. Yes. Valuing individuality, reflective learning, adaptability. These are wonderful. Openness, interaction. Yes. Sharing, autonomy, honesty and curiosity, rapport, communication. Yes. And it's so fun, right? One of, I think, the great things about being an educator is we get to design for these moments. We get to design for these values. And sometimes there is a mismatch, right? I often in my job really get to think about how the materials and environments align with the learning brain, align with our values. And sometimes there is this mismatch. So I may believe in variability, but all of the desks are the exact same. I may believe in variability, but I say, oh, all the work has to be done in the exact same way. And it's just a moment to pause and say, is this design, how is this design aligning with my core values? Maybe I believe everyone should feel welcome in my space, but the door is hard to open. So, maybe you get a little door stopper to make sure that the door can open. These little things that you do, they do make a difference in the learning. They make a difference in the feeling of the space. So whatever space you may be thinking about today, maybe you're thinking about a whole classroom or just a bulletin board, or maybe an office where students are able to come in and speak one-on-one with you. One year when I was teaching, I just had a cart. I was sharing a classroom. So maybe you're just thinking about how you get your cart ready to move from room to room, whatever your space is. I really look forward to the opportunity today to reflect with me on how we can design to make sure we don't have a mismatch in our core values and how we are designing for learning for each and every one of our learners. It's going to be so fun. So I will start with variability. It truly is one of the most prevalent things we notice about the brain. And when people say, do you have an article about variability? I can't find an article that doesn't talk about variability. Variability is pervasive across our brains. It is, if you even think about our foot size and shape, we know we can see our feet. So we know they're different sizes and shapes. So we design all these different size and shaped shoes. And depending on the goal, we're going to wear different shoes for the day, but we each get our own sizes, right? They make these. And it is harder to see inside the brain. We can't see that variability. So it's harder for us to know to design for it sometimes, but it's real and it matters. So we know that students will vary in their interests and their preferences. They'll vary in their background experiences, their language, their executive functions and planning skills, their motivations. And this variability is predictable, so we can anticipate and plan for it. So I want to introduce to you all a teacher colleague who is just a wonderful art educator. Her name is Liz Byron Loya, and she has taken some images from her classroom to share with us. And again, I know these aren't your classrooms, so yours may be very different, but hopefully these spark some ideas. These can spark some imagination for what you may do and what you may already be doing in your classroom spaces. So she's thinking about how she provides more than one way for students to perceive the environment, to perceive what's in the information in the room. So she has her organization boxes. They have English, Spanish, and a picture. And she has shifted how she does her daily schedule from all text to having a text with an image. And so here, the goal is for students to be able to get what they need from the supply boxes. So to reduce a barrier, she has provided the multiple ways for them to perceive the information. And it's such a simple option. I know you all know this option, but it really can make a difference and really reduce a barrier and actually reduce barriers for her so students get what they need very easily. And Liz described how one time she even tried to glue items onto the organization boxes. So she actually tried to glue scissors onto the outside of the box. And I love this story because she found that to actually be a barrier. It would fall off, it distracted students. So you don't need to have endless options. You could just pick one option for students to be able to, perceive the information in the classroom. Maybe it's the clock you have in the room and thinking about what might be more than one way for students to be able to know the time or when they're going to shift in the schedule. And this design might be essential for some students. There might be, a student who needs a visual schedule. And instead of just making it for one student, we can do that for every student, for all students. And when we know our goal, we can be really intentional about the options that we provide for students to be able to get there. And sometimes knowing the goal actually helps you to reduce the choices, right? So she knew her goal was for students to be able to get what they need and find it quickly. And she could reduce the option of actually having the object on the outside because it was a distractor. So it can be really interesting, I think, sometimes to think about where there are opportunities to add options and where there might be options to actually reduce those options to make sure you're getting to that goal. Another option that supports variability, this is another classroom here in Massachusetts. It's for 6-year-old students. And the design was also set up to support variability. And variability here, they had supply boxes for students to be able to get what they need, and they put those right on the desks. And another option they did was give flexible seating options because sometimes students like to wiggle and move a little bit more. And they didn't say, only Allison gets the moving chair, but they said, if you need to move during this class period, you can use one of the moving chairs. If you need to sit more still, you can sit in one of those chairs. So there were 2 kinds of chairs, and students could pick and choose which kind they needed. Oh, I'm pausing here to make sure everyone can hear me. Okay, good. And so there were 2 different kinds of chairs that students could choose from. So, I've been in classrooms where only students who maybe need executive function supports, do they get the supply box? Or there might be supplies in the back of the room. And so students have to get up in front of the whole class and go to the back of the room because they're the one who forgot the pencil. So notice how just the subtle design of where these things are in the classroom space can make a difference for the learners to get what they need and to not be embarrassed about getting what they need. So we really encourage you to make these options, the flexible seating, the flexible supply boxes, available for all students to be able to get what they need when they need it. They don't have to go across the room. They don't have to be the one student who forgot it, but we can proactively anticipate some of these barriers and design with some flexibility in our spaces. So we'll pause here and see if you have some ideas for how you design for variability of your students in your classroom spaces. And I am hoping that I'm going to give visual representations for those of you who cannot see the slides, and we will make sure to share the slides. Great, I'm seeing learning stations, having different tasks for learners to be able to choose from. Oh, Joanne, we're going to talk about voice and choice next. This is amazing. Seating so students can see each other, amazing. Production variables, thank you, Matthew. Setting personal goals, amazing. Name tags and having drawings that show their interests. So these are fabulous ideas for how you design for variability. And I just really appreciate that some of them are so small, right? Like just on your name tag, also having a picture. These are how students are facing each other to support collaboration. These may seem like very little things, but they can be really, really powerful. And the important thing is to provide those options for all learners. All learners can benefit from this flexibility, not just certain students who you think have to have those options. Certainly some do have to, but we want to open them up and make it more truly inclusive in that way. So one of you already mentioned a second core value that I wanted to share about today. And the second core value is student voice and choice. So this is, again, an example from this art classroom here in Massachusetts with Liz. She had an options board set up in her classroom where students could know what to do when they finish their work. Because, well, I love this idea because as we know, this solves a common problem. Students don't finish their work all at the same time, right? We know this. This is some of that predictable variability. And so I just love this idea because we know students will finish their work at different times. It's part of the variability we're anticipating and planning for. And so some of the options she developed are if you finish early, you could give feedback to another student. I thought this was a fun one. You could write fan mail to another student about their work, or you could write fan mail to your own self about your own work. She invited them to go sketch. Remember, this was an art class. She gave them an extra how to draw activity. They had an option to read. And it might start to feel, if you're like me, I'm starting to go, oh my goodness, this is a lot of choice. And so remember, you don't have to have endless choice. Maybe at the start of the year, you're wanting to establish the routine in your classroom. Here are things you can do that are productive and are still toward the learning goal if you finish earlier. And this routine is a really important one. And so at the start of this year, as you're establishing your classroom routine, maybe you start with just two choices, right? Maybe you start with, okay, if you're done early, you could give feedback to a peer, or you could read a book, right? Maybe you have just two options. And as the year goes on, you can start to build on those choices and invite students into co-designing those options with you. If you're done early, what would you add as a student for what they can do when they get done early? So, again, really starting with the routines that I value your voice and choice. I also value your variability. Here's our what if I'm done early, space in the room, fantastic. And then you can start to build. Again, don't feel like you have to have endless choices. Two choices can make a difference, and you can start to build and grow on those with the students. Oh, and I'm seeing some more great ideas in the chat. One I'm going to mention next, so I'm going to let that drive me. I'm going to so I'm seeing here library design for personal selection for reading and learning. That is an amazing space you could try to set up. Even if you just have a small cart, how could you have this on that small cart space? Amazing. Having games, yes, games can be a powerful way for students to keep learning. Again, you can have these games that students create. They can be games all connected to the learning goals. And here's an idea that someone mentioned, and Liz also includes in her room. And I want to share this example with you because it makes me smile. So she has a place in the classroom where students can give her feedback and communicate with her anytime. It's just a little mailbox for comments. And so she has some quick options that she always does with students for quick emojis like thumbs up, thumbs to the side, or thumbs down. But I like the comment box because she has found that students will be quite honest with her. She shared this comment. A student said, "It would be great if we could get to work right away and don't give us a whole speech if we've been working on the same thing for like 3 days." And I just thought this was the greatest comment. This student was actually saying, "Please let us get to work. Stop talking to us so much." So that was a really helpful comment. Again, the student felt safe. They were able to share this comment with the teacher. This box is there, the cards are there. There can be different ways that students give feedback, but I just thought this was just such a cute and just really powerful. Again, this might be a small option in your classroom space for communicating, but you really are expressing to students by this design, I value your feedback. I value your voice. I want to be able to give some choice and options that are meaningful to you. So thank you all. I'm glad that this was one that resonated to you all with some of you as we're thinking about how we are designing some of our spaces for voice and choice. A third core value that I wanted to share that is also really important, and many of you have already noted in the chat, is this idea of student agency, where students are able to have ownership over their own learning and get what they need to do their learning. Some days I may need to put headphones on and go sit in a quiet space. Some days I may need to be more active and collaborating with my peers. And where there is flexibility, for me to be able to get these things in the environment, in the space, it is in service of the learning. We're not letting students back off of the learning. I don't get to put headphones on and not do the learning. I'm putting the headphones on in service of the learning, for example. So I really like to think about different ways that we can try to design for this agency. This is, again, an example from a classroom, and I know not all classrooms. I certainly did not have this kind of space in my classroom. But again, try to imagine, this is where you might imagine the magic. What might be a space where you can set up when students just need a little space? Maybe they need a break for a minute. Maybe they, had a rough class period before and they just need to regroup. Maybe they're tired and they can feel the self-regulation being a challenge, a barrier for them. So in this space, there are a few items where students can reflect, they can journal write, the distractions are reduced, they can breathe. They even can look at nature. I listened to an interesting podcast recently that describes how even having a little bit of nature, like a plant or even a picture of a plant, can be calming for our nervous system. And I like the fact that students can have the choice to go to this space as they need it. And she actually has two of these spaces in her room, which I know is a luxury many of us do not have. So students can even choose from the quiet spaces which one they want to go to. One has a little light, one has, a little more reading materials, and one has a little less. And again, it is a moment for us as an educator to see, oh my goodness, a student is in a space that can be a cue for, just checking in on how the group is doing, how the emotions may be, how the affect is. And so I wonder if any of you have spaces like this where students are able to just get a little breath if they need it. They can just, and it's again, not just for certain students, but for any student to be able to, again, just get that space. Yes, someone is noticing space with colors, blackboards where they could draw. Yes, I love this. Yeah, some students may not want to communicate as much. So being able to let them have different ways that they share their information, they share their ideas. Learning corners, amazing. Learning corners can be really helpful. We also can think about ways that we're providing options for this learner agency. And some of you also noted this in the chat, where there can be visual goal setting and concept mapping. This can be done by students and with students. So this is a really simple idea where the teacher has the main concepts for the year. And then there's a little arrow that says, where are we in the year? And it's just, again, a great opportunity for students to be metacognitive about here's where we've been, here's where we're going, here's how things can connect to each other, and building concept maps through the year that are, this image is mostly text, but I invite that, the text and the images. And being able to help students to have their own goals, their own rubrics and self-reflection on, how are you moving toward the target goal? What are your glows? What's going well? And then what are your areas to grow? And I really find when I invite students to have their own space on a rubric or to set their own goal for a project, it can really surprise you some of the ideas they share of where they've put forth effort, where they've overcome a challenge and they've really succeeded, and how they can indicate some of those glows and grows. Yes, we invite the youngest of students. You may do more visuals with this. The question about can kindergartners do this? Yes, they might not use text as much, but they can use words, they can use pictures to really think about, what is your goal? And how can we get students to those goals? Amazing. And it really can help support some of that learner agency. And I wanted to close with what I think can be one of the most important core values that we bring to our classroom spaces. And it's one that we actually don't see in the classroom space, but it's one that we feel a lot of times. It's one that is, is more of a mindset. It's a way that we communicate with our students, with our families, and with each other. And that is that barriers are in the design, not the learner. So instead of saying things like, oh my goodness, this student isn't reading at grade level. Instead, we reframe to say, how is the design supporting the grade level reading? Notice how that shift is so subtle, but it's so important because it's framing the barrier in the design. We can do something about the design. We can design with students. We can co-design to get them to the reading, to get them to that learning goal. So we could try it with another example. Instead of saying something like, oh my goodness, this student never sits still long enough to pay attention, we can again shift the way we frame the barrier. So instead of it being a problem with the student, we shift to say, how is the design supporting learners to be able to pay attention? And this shift in our language is a shift in the culture to this being a space where we're all welcome, where we're going to design for the variability of our learners. And these tips are good for all ages. These tips are ones, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, that could work for us as adults in our spaces. We can think about how the design is supporting our variability. How are we getting information in the different ways that we need? How is the design supporting our agency and our voice and choice in our work? And how are we truly reducing barriers in the design and valuing all of the variability that learners bring to us, with us, in our learning? So one of my favorite quotes from the founder of Universal Design for Learning, David Rose, is he said, I hope that our learners are more different at the end of the year than they are at the beginning, that we truly are valuing the variability, our student voice and choice, and our learner agency through our design. And so I'll leave you with one last quote today, and it is one of my favorite. This was adapted from an educator in New York here, and it is, instead of asking if students are ready for school, how are we asking if school is ready for our students? And this again is that subtle reframing of barriers and opportunities. And so I thank you all for sharing so many amazing tips that you're already doing. I hope you maybe got one little idea today that you might add to your classroom space to, again, just really welcome all of the learners as we get back to school. So I want to thank the Macmillan team. I want to thank you all for being here from all around the world. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful start of the school year.